After Star Wars was released, it became apparent that my story, however many films it took to tell, was only one of thousands that could be told about the characters who inhabited its galaxy. But these were not the stories that I was destined to tell. Instead, they would spring from the imagination of other writers, inspired by the glimpse of a galaxy that Star Wars provided. Today, it is an amazing, if unexpected, legacy of Star Wars that so many gifted writers are contributing new stories to that saga. George Lucas, from the introduction of A Splinters of the Mind's Eye, 1996.
Welcome back to the Skywalker Files from a certain point of view, the podcast that digs through the dusty archives of the Star Wars Expanded Universe to see what was built, what was broken, and what still lingers from a certain point of view. I'm your host Dormamu, and today we're opening a story that doesn't take place in a throne room, a battlefield, or even the Jedi Temple. This one starts in farmland. We're taking a look at Prelude to Rebellion, a 6-issue comic series published by Dark Horse Comics from December of 1998 to May of 1999. It served as one of the lead-ins to the Phantom Menace, part of a soft rollout meant to reintroduce the Jedi to audiences who hadn't seen a new Star Wars story in over a decade. The focus here is Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, long before he sat on the Jedi Council and long before his head turned into a meme. Here, he's a local, a native son of the planet Cerea, trying to balance his role as a Jedi with his loyalty to a people who don't trust outsiders and barely tolerate technology. What unfolds is a surprisingly grounded political story, small in scope, but big in implications. This isn't a galaxy-wide crisis. It's one man trying to hold a fragile peace in his own backyard. There are no Sith, no clones, no space battles. Just power struggles, generational conflict, and the creeping shadow of the Republic's reach. On today's episode, we'll look at how this comic fits into the broader publishing landscape of the late 90s, the unique window it gives us into Cerean society, and whether it successfully expands the galaxy far, far away, or just makes it feel a little weirder. Prelude to Rebellion was published by Dark Horse Comics between December of 1998 and May of 1999, just a few months ahead of the release of The Phantom Menace in theaters. At the time, Dark Horse was the undisputed home of Star Wars comics, and this series was one of several projects designed to build anticipation for the return of the franchise after a 16-year cinematic silence. Written by Jan Sternad, with art by Anthony Wynn and colors by David Nestel, the comic was part of a short-lived initiative to explore characters and settings directly connected to the prequel trilogy, but without spoiling the films themselves. In that case, that meant putting the spotlight on Ki-Adi-Mundi, one of the few Jedi Council members audiences would meet in Episode 1, and giving him a backstory that fleshed out both the man and the alien culture he came from. In terms of timeline, the events of Prelude to Rebellion are set roughly 1 year before the Phantom Menace, placing it at 33 before the Battle of Yavin. It's a period that would later become rich territory for stories of political unrest, Jedi disillusionment, and the quiet beginnings of the Republic's collapse. But in 1998, that groundwork hadn't been fully laid. So in many ways, this comic was riding in the dark, guessing at what would matter in the coming films and hoping not to contradict anything that hadn't been revealed yet. As a result, Prelude to Rebellion ends up feeling like a bit of a narrative time capsule. It's part of the old expanded universe trying to make room for the new, both cautious and ambitious, incomplete but earnest. At the center of Prelude to Rebellion is a face most fans recognize, but few know much about: Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi. In the films, he is a background figure, a silent observer in the council chamber, later the unfortunate recipient of a clone betrayal on Majito. But here, he's something much more tangible: a man with a home, a family, and a culture that actively resists the very order he serves. Ki-Adi-Mundi is a Cerean, a species marked by their elongated craniums, binary brain structures, and rigid patriarchal traditions. On Cerea, men are rare and polygamy is institutionalized, not for pleasure, but for survival. As one of these rare males, Mundi holds a privileged social position, even as he walks the path of the Jedi. The comic leans into this tension. He's allowed to have wives, he has children, and yet he's still sworn to Jedi ideals. That contradiction isn't hidden, it's explored. What makes Mundi interesting here isn't that he's noble or powerful, it's that he's torn between duty and heritage, between the clean lines of Jedi philosophy and the messy emotional politics of his homeworld. He's respected, but resented. His life on Cerea is seen both as a protector and a symbol of unwanted change, and that duality drives the story. But this isn't just a tale about duality, it's about a father searching for his daughter. Sylvin, Mundi's daughter, has gone missing. Her disappearance isn't random, it's rooted in protest. She's joined the so-called tech movement, a growing faction of Cerean youth who reject their society's isolationist stance and advocate for integration with the larger galaxy. Her defection isn't just personal, it's political. For Mundi, the search for Sylvin is a reckoning. It forces him to confront not only the instability brewing on Cerea, but his own failures as both a Jedi and a father. Enter Braun, an off-world diplomat with charm, ambition, and a very specific agenda. Braun has aligned himself with the tech movement, stoking their frustration and encouraging rebellion against the old ways. Whether he believes in their cause or simply sees them as pawns is left deliberately ambiguous. But his presence on Cerea is disruptive. He's the spark in a field of dry grass. And then there's Effent Mon, a familiar name to fans of obscure action figures and Jabba's palace crowd shots. Here, he's more than just background color. Mon is a weapons and tech smuggler operating on the fringes of Cerean law. He's arming the tech movement, profiting from the planet's unrest, and playing both sides to his advantage. He's not a mastermind, but he knows how to survive and profit in chaos. Together, these characters form the web that Prelude to Rebellion spins. They don't just tell a story, they embody a crossroads between tradition and progress, isolation and integration, family and ideology. The story opens with Ki-Adi-Mundi attending a council meeting on his homeworld of Cerea, a planet caught in a cultural standoff. Cerea's ruling council has long rejected off-world technology, maintaining an austere, agrarian society. That philosophy is starting to crack. The younger generation, frustrated by limited opportunities and isolation, is beginning to push back. Mundi's participation is brief. He believes Cerea is better off staying out of galactic politics. He's tasked with representing Cerea in a debate over political galactic Senate representation. But what begins as a diplomatic mission quickly turns personal when he learns that his daughter Sylvin has gone missing. She's joined the tech movement, an underground faction advocating for technological integration and change. Her disappearance isn't just a family crisis. It's a symptom of Cerea's larger identity crisis. As Mundi searches for Sylvin, he uncovers a web of political manipulation. The tech movement has been emboldened by Braun, an off-worlder with polished rhetoric and vague promises. Braun claims to support Cerean youth, but his true aims are less clear. He's fanning the flames of civil unrest, not to liberate, but to destabilize. Complicating matters further is Effent Mon, a seasoned smuggler who's bringing weapons and forbidden technology onto the planet. Mon is playing all sides, arming radicals, profiting from black market sales, and staying just far enough out of the spotlight to avoid direct confrontation. He's not the villain of the piece, but he is a barometer for just how far Cerea is slipping towards chaos. As the story progresses, Mundi's journey becomes less about recovering his daughter and more about confronting the fragility of his people's values. His position as both Jedi and Cerean noble places him in an impossible bind. He must decide whether to uphold tradition or adapt to the inevitable changes sweeping across the galaxy. The tone of Prelude to Rebellion is markedly more introspective than most Star Wars comics of its time. There are no grand battles or lightsaber duels. Conflict comes through ideology, debate, and sabotage. There's a weariness to the story, a sense that we're watching the early tremors of something larger, an empire not yet born, but are already eroding the edges of independent worlds. Thematically, the comic grapples with generational divide, the limits of tradition, and the moral compromises made in the name of peace. It doesn't offer easy answers, and it doesn't pretend that all sides are equally valid. Instead, it paints a picture of a society trying to stand still in a galaxy that's already moving on without it. For Ki-Adi-Mundi, the real rebellion isn't the one his daughter joins. It's the one happening inside himself. The slow realization that loyalty to a stagnant world may not be the same as doing what's right. In terms of galactic scale, Prelude to Rebellion is a quiet story, but it ripples outward in subtle ways, linking itself to the broader tapestry of the Star Wars expanded universe and the early days of the prequel era. First and foremost, it expands on Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, giving him a personal and cultural context that would otherwise be absent from his film appearances. In The Phantom Menace, Mundi is just another voice on the council. Here, he's given shape, conviction, and contradiction. For readers moving through the EU in chronological order, this comic gives him a foundation that pays off in later stories where his role expands, particularly in the Republic comic series and eventually in the Clone Wars multimedia project. This story also offers a rare pre-Phantom Menace look at the tension between the Jedi Order and local planetary traditions. We see how Jedi are sometimes resented, even feared, when they return home. The comic indirectly comments on the Jedi's reputation in the galaxy, not as noble protectors, but as agents of the Republic's bureaucratic sprawl. Cerea itself is rarely revisited in the EU, but the cultural ideas introduced here, rigid tradition, fear of technology, and the generational divide, foreshadow the conflicts that would engulf the Republic in the years to come. In that sense, Prelude to Rebellion functions thematically as a microcosm of what Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith would explore on a galactic scale, a world crumbling not because of outside invasion, but because it refuses to evolve. Even Effent Mon's presence connects this comic to later lore. Though mostly known as one of Jabba the Hutt's cronies, here he's positioned as a free agent, subtly enriching the criminal underworld's depth across various stories. Finally, Prelude to Rebellion is a prelude in more than name. It marks the beginning of Dark Horse's push to align its storytelling more closely with the upcoming prequel films. While its specific plot threads don't get direct sequels, its tone and structure, political tension, moral ambiguity, Jedi disillusionment, would echo through the Star Wars comics of the early 2000s. Prelude to Rebellion isn't flashy. It's not a lightsaber spectacle or a sweeping galactic epic. Instead, it's a slow-burning meditation on culture, ideology, and change, told through the lens of a father looking for his daughter in a world he thought he understood. There's a certain bravery in telling a story this small in a universe so large. At a time when Star Wars was preparing to explode back onto screens with pod races, Sith Lords, and Senate intrigue, this comic paused to look inward. It asked what happens when a Jedi returns home and finds that the Force can't fix what time, fear, and stubborn tradition have broken. Is it a perfect story? Not quite. The pacing can feel uneven, and the dialogue occasionally leans too far into exposition. But its ambition, exploring the generational rifts, the cost of neutrality, and the Jedi's uneasy place in the Republic, makes it stand out. In retrospect, Prelude to Rebellion feels like a tone setter, not for the blockbuster saga films, but for the quieter, more nuanced, expanded universe stories that would come to define the early 2000s. It's not essential reading, but it is valuable reading, especially for those curious about how the Jedi were perceived outside the temple walls and how fragile peace could be in a galaxy already beginning to tremble. Ki-Adi-Mundi may not be the most beloved character in Star Wars, but in this brief spotlight, he's something far more rarer, complicated. And in the EU, that's often where the best stories begin. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Prelude to Rebellion, a quiet, thoughtful comic that chooses the slow burn over the spectacle and gives us a rare glimpse of Ki-Adi-Mundi as more than just a background figure. It's a story about family, tradition, and the uneasy tensions that ripple through a galaxy on the brink of change. Not every piece of Star Wars lore needs to be a fireworks show, and sometimes these smaller stories reveal the cracks that the big events eventually shatter. Next time on the Skywalker Files, we turn our attention to one of the very first novels to expand the prequel saga. We'll be looking at the Phantom Menace, but not the film. We're diving into the Terry Brooks novelization, a surprisingly rich and expansive take on Episode 1 that adds depth, backstory, and entire scenes you won't find on screen. It's the Jedi Council with a bit more nuance, Anakin Skywalker with a bit more pathos, and Darth Sidious with a little more clarity in his sinister long game. Thanks for listening. May the Force be with you. Always.